Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doom Patrol. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, the team had a vote. Rita's putting everything into this. It's like, right, we're going to change the future, and that means we have to change a little bit. So she's like, right, instead of wearing heels, I'm wearing flats now. But because of my elastic abilities, I can still be tall, the same height or taller. And she keeps adjusting her height, and just everyone's looking at her like, what are you doing? Like, okay, sure, whatever. And she's got this grand plan, but the others are like, yeah, we need to make some grand changes. So with those changes, we're not going to let you be the leader. And obviously Larry kind of felt the worst about it. I mean, they all felt bad of it. They were all kind of hanging their head in shame and kind of looking away as they were voting Rita off. And what makes matters worse is she's like, well, you can't do it because you're basically useless right now. Oh God, Vic. And Larry and Cliff are unqualified. And Larry and Cliff almost look at each other like, that's kind of a dick thing to say. And it's like, right, Jane doesn't want this either. So I'm kind of the only choice. I was like, oh boy, are we about to? And they choose Madame Rouge. And she's like, oh, really? She's like, oh, this is kind of an honor. She's like, stop with all the being trying to be so humble thing. And it's just like, right. The fact is, it's like, well, she has had experience being a supervillain, so supervillain is who we need right now if it means saving the world. And for Rita, it's like, no, she sucked as a hero, and she sucked as a villain, so she'll do this. It's like, well, to be fair, you guys haven't had, we've had a better track record with the hero thing lately, but it's like, yeah, you guys have sucked at being heroes too as well. You've had a string of success recently, which that ends up being a whole interesting conversation. But basically, everyone ends up splintering off into the pairs, that being Jane and Cyborg, Cliff and Madame Rouge, as well as Larry and Rita. So let's kind of break down the different teams. Rouge is like, right, we're going to have to take care of this Darren Jones situation, because it's got to be him because by Rita's research, it's got to be him, that he most likely got infected. So it's like, hey, let's go take care of this situation. So they only need Cliff because, well, for one, he is the one that can't be infected. Well, he can be, but it's like, right, you are a zombie killing machine. You're a literal robot. So let's do this. So the two of them kind of go on their bike. I even love, he's like, right, I told you could have ridden on my handlebars of the bike. And she's like, I would rather die or something like that than do that. Cause I guess it's just so humiliating to be like, no, no. And they come across a car, and Cliff has Cliff from time to time has those very existential moments where he's like, right, working on a car is it's the only thing for him. It's like, yeah, my dad was good at it. Obviously we got into a lot of stuff about his dad last season about my dad sucked. He wasn't a good guy. But it's like, yeah, when you work on a car, it gives you something to focus on, and everything else kind of falls into place to some extent. It allows you to focus all your energy into one thing, which obviously seems to always kind of been Cliff's biggest issue, that he does kind of tend to fixate on one thing and kind of let other stuff kind of fall to the wayside to some extent, because that's his way of dealing with stuff, because that was always something that's his dad's way of dealing with things, and that's the only positive common ground he had with his father. So I think it's kind of symbolic of that kind of trickling down. But Madame Rouge is kind of just like, right, there's actually a lot of commonality between you and me in that regard, that we both kind of don't have this place in the world, because she's like, right, I ended up dying because I was alone, and we're both kind of have no one, because Cliff has kind of been isolated for so long, and he talks about the conversation of right, he could fix up a car, and that touching the parts and stuff like that, he could lose himself in it, but it's like, right, I'd rather not do that. I'd rather the first thing I touch is either my daughter's hand in my hand, or, holding my grandson and burping him as he's in my arms and stuff like that. Because once again, we saw it as he's kind of, like I said, lost himself in other things in the previous seasons. Like when he was taking those pills, as well as blowing not only his money, but everyone's money, last season, I believe. Yeah, that was last season. But they ultimately end up running into zombie Darren. Which interesting timing on that front too. I mean, well, it's just like, to be fair, they did the zombie thing last season, but it's just funny because obviously Titans recently had to deal with the zombie situation. Oh, really quickly, there was a joke earlier on. I was like, oh, I appreciate that, where it's like, oh, they're dealing with the butt situation. And then, like, yes, we got to deal with this butt apocalypse. And then, like, you had Jane be like, huh, Christ is a infinite ass. And then her and Cliff are like, yeah. I'm like, I love that, because it's like, well, let's not forget, they had, like, obviously, like, small cameo-ish appearances, like, you know, in the aftermath of Crisis, being like, hey, Doom Patrol takes place on Earth 20-something. I always forget. It's like 20, maybe... It's like 25, 26, or 27, something in the mid-20s. So I was like, oh, it just kind of immediately make it think of that. I don't know if that's why they made that specific reference, just because, like, I mean, obviously it's a big comic book thing, obviously, but I wonder, is it more so just because, like, well, it's in the general zeitgeist because of the Crisis situation on the CW, the Arrowverse. So I don't know if that's me reading too much into that or not. But either way, back to the whole zombie conversation of Darren Jones. They actually finally track him down. It's like, right, we got to deal with this. It's like, yeah, I'm going to end you. But Cliff can still understand zombie. And you have Darren be like, yeah, he swore off zombieism. He refuses to eat anybody. And so for him, he's just been waiting for a merciful death. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I came here to fight you. I'm not going to give you, like, a merciful death. And it's like, you know, Rouge kind of forced Cliff's hand and kind of led to a confrontation, and Cliff crushed his head. And sadly, the first, like, contact he's made on some human level was him squishing Darren Jones's brains. And in that moment, it clicked for Rouge, where she immediately thought back to everything she did, weaponizing people for the Bureau. And it kind of, in that moment, it triggered that for her, because it's like, right, like, despite me, you know, wanting Rita's forgiveness, and I've got to remember who I am, because that was a whole conversation with Harris in last episode, where she was like, yeah, like, it's still part of her nature that she's having to try and fight back. And it's like, yeah, in that moment, it's like, yeah, I'm still me. Like, that little bit of me, like, I could have found another way around this, but I forced Cliff's hand. She doesn't, like, it's not until this moment that she's like, right, that's what I did. Like, amongst the team, he was the weapon I found them. He could be the most useful. I basically did what I used to do for the Bureau, is, like, categorize those who can be weaponized and those who can't. And I did it in this moment. And Cliff's like, right, you did what you had to do, but it's still cut deep. And even later on, which we'll jump to Vic and Jane's side of things next, but when it comes to killing the next, like, you know, the last butt, or at least what they believe to be the last butt, Cliff has reservations, because he's like, yeah, I'm all about it, but then he hesitates, because he's like, right, the first thing I felt was like this squishy coldness. He's almost like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it felt like he was probably already dead, but like he needed to take a minute, because he hasn't felt anything in over 40 years. And like the first non-material thing he felt was a person, him squishing someone's skull. And you see Rouge just sitting on the steps listening, because it's like, right, like I did that to you. Your one goal was, like, you're right, you wanted to touch your daughter or your grandchild, to be your first memory, but now your first memory of touch will forever be tainted now, because it's like you'll always remember the squishiness of, like, killing, and that's gonna fuck with Cliff. Like, that is a major mind fuck on so many levels. And Rouge just, you know, realizes, like, right, because I made that choice, I was chosen as the leader, and yeah, this is a terrible decision on my part. That it's like, you know, I think feeling that guilt about everything. So that was an interesting development. Vic ended up leaving with Jane, and they're obviously meeting up with the Bureau, as particular an agent, because it's like, right, there has to be another butt out there that they're aware of. And so they meet the butt hunter, which I'm like, are we just not going to mention? Did that come up before, that the hair hunter? Did he ever mention the fact that he had siblings? And it's like, right, we're just super ignoring that and coasting on that. And so it's like, oh yeah, zombies. He's like, what's a zombie? He's like, Jane's like, wait, which is, I don't know if that's supposed to be like a little bit of a wink and a nod to like zombie material, specifically like The Walking Dead. It's because The Walking Dead ends up being most prime example of like oh my god, no one, well, I think there's other things that have done that, but most zombie material, at least in more recent years, whether it's like a iZombie, or I think even obviously Zombieland is like, oh my god, we know the rules and the shtick of like zombies, because it's like, yeah, zombies exist as a pop culture thing, but like as The Walking Dead and I think maybe some other stuff makes it go like, right, we don't even use the word zombie because zombies are no commodity in this world type of thing. So, but for her, it's almost like I don't know if that was supposed to be like a wink and nod to that type of, thing, but it's like, it's also like, right, butt hunting's the only thing I know. Everything else kind of falls to the wayside. So they ultimately ended up getting the final butt. But Jane and Victor had some interesting conversations, because it's like, right, I'm trying to save the world, but she's like, right, but the world's always going to be in danger just some other day. Like, the fact is, you can't just keep using saving the day as an excuse not to go live your life. Because like, right, what is tomorrow? It's like, well, Wednesday. It's like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? He doesn't know. Because what if his friends hit him back up? Like, was it Derek being like, yo, are you serious about this? Me and the others, like, we're going to meet up this weekend. Are you available? And he never got back to him because he got sidetracked with the whole butt thing. It's like, right, we got to save the world first. But it's like, yeah, there's always going to be something. You know this world better than anyone. There's always going to be some other, like, issue that the superhero, needs to save. So, like, how long you're going to, keep using it as an excuse not to live your life. Then they talk about the Jane situation, which we see that there's like, I almost expected the puzzle pieces to keep falling infinitely, but turned out they didn't. But now I even love the whole thing of like, wait, there's no corner pieces. There's no edge pieces. Cause like, that's what's supposed to be like that's the general thumb rule of puzzles. I probably have not put a puzzle together since I was a kid. I also don't have the patience because I'm a very, very impatient human being and get easily frustrated. But she's like, there's no corner. She's like, all these pieces look the same. Especially because like in her hand, they're literally turning to make it even worse. So she's like, fuck this, and left it behind. But it turns out Kay got a Niall-style interview by Vic a couple months ago. And Jane ends up looking into it, and Kay is like, right, she basically believes she doesn't need the other personas anymore. It's like, right, you guys need to go live your own life. Their purpose for so many years, for decades, has been for the purpose of, hey, we've got to protect her. That's been their sole purpose, their sole point of existing. And I think that's why she disappeared, because she wants them to go find their own purposes. It's like, right, don't like tie yourself to me. I mean, maybe that's why she got rid of Harrison, because it's like, right, you are an issue. Like, you are going to hold the others back instead of letting them breathe and be themselves. Maybe that's why Kay did what she did last episode. Maybe that's just like, right, Harrison, maybe it's like, or maybe just something broke inside of her and she's like, I don't need you anymore, so I'm going to kill you. But the fact that she didn't do it to Jane must mean like maybe she's going to whittle down the others. Like, once again, you come after me, I'm going to do that to you. But, or maybe she's getting rid of the ones that would hold the others back, like a Dr. Harrison would be the one that would hold everyone back. Maybe that's why she did what she did. I don't know. But Jane is like, right, what am I supposed to do? Like, outside of, because being the primary was kind of her thing for so long. And it's like, last season kind of touched on like, right, because the conversation became, at least like by Vic saying like, right, what Kay needs isn't necessarily what Jane needs isn't necessarily what Kay needs anymore. It's like, right, you need two separate things, because the whole point is for everyone to be kind of their own individual, not just like, we are Kay's protectors. That's defined them for so long. So it's like, who are we outside of that? And last season kind of touched on that too, in particular with Jane, but she kind of flew back to being like, no, I have to be Kay's protector. I kind of have to keep up my guard. That is my job. My job, even more so than the others, as the primary, so. And who Jane is outside of all of that, and how the other personas are going to play in all that as well, what their purposes are going to be. We'll have to wait and see how that ultimately ends up playing out. As for the Rita and Larry situation, Larry's still dealing with this rambunctious Keeg, and Keeg won't explain like, right, what was said, and he's even being like, right, whatever it was is most likely my fault. And maybe Keeg, future Keeg as well as young Keeg, connected on the fact is that Larry is filled with so much self-loathing that it's like, right, how can you, because I think the long run of it all is older Keeg probably pointed out what happened to Larry. Larry is just so consumed with self-loathing, he's refusing to live his life. Like, the fact is that and once again, I say this as someone who learned this lesson. This is something I talk about continuously because it's a lesson I didn't learn until older, but I will always associate this with one particular relationship that I kind of made a person my everything. And that's what Larry's doing with Keek. He's trying to make it like, right. And that can eventually lead to bitterness because it's like, right. Well, for one, when you hold on to this person too tightly, they can never get too far from your grasp because it's like, no, I need you. You're my everything. Without you, I kind of have nothing. And it's like, right. Rather than, and Larry's kind of put himself in that position. He's like, in his mind, all he has is Keek. He has nothing else. So he's holding on to that rather than kind of, relying on the people around him, going out there, kind of living his life, realizing but he's just drowning in self-hatred and codependency. I mean, it's like, right. It's, you branch yourself out, that you put yourself out there. Cause even then he's had small interactions between last episode and this episode. But if you do notice, like Larry's had more dialogue around, related to, and towards Keeg than he has anyone else in the Doom Patrol. And I think that speaks volumes. And obviously Rita's taken his betrayal the hardest because out of anyone there, they've connected the most. They've always been like, hey, we're the team, Larry and Rita. And for him, it's like, right, you out of anyone know, Rita, what it's like. Well, for one, you were a shitty leader. Like in the beginning, it's like, yeah, we were all gung-ho about it because it's about doing good. But now it's like, it eventually just became like you were so busy barking orders, and we were just following it. That's like we were just going with the motions. It wasn't even like we were doing it just for the sake of like, oh, we're doing good. It's just kind of like all right, here we go again. Like, it lost some of the good nature of what it was supposed to initially be about. But also for him, it's like, right, you came back from your time traveling adventures last season and you were broken and you looked at us like we were strangers. And for him, it's like, I never fully got over that. So for him, it's like, you kind of pushed me away and you were doing all that you were doing after you came back. And because he's almost saying like, right, you're talking about how close we are, but I was a stranger to you for so long and you kind of pushed us away. Your time travel experience changed you. And he's like, I'm trying to do the same thing. He's like, right, because Key is all I have left. And she's like, all you have left. And for her, it's like, being the leader is all I had left. And I lost that because of you. Because becoming leader allowed her to focus on something other than being consumed by her revenge against Madame Rouge, revenge for everything she lost, Malcolm included, like that new love, that new purpose she found. The sisterhood of Dada, all that was taken from her because of Rouge. And so it's like, right, leadership kind of kept her at bay. Like, all of them are compensating for, and it's obviously not just this season. That's always been their thing about compensating for, using things as kind of temporary fixes. And they were meant to be temporary, but they kind of became a permanent fix. And eventually it's just like, right, these wounds have festered and grown, and the same Band-Aid doesn't help anymore. It's kind of it's a metaphor I'm going with this regard. So it seems like the Keek situation hasn't gotten resolved by the end of this episode. And obviously, I'm sure Rita's still obviously bitter about how everything played out. So obviously, she has every reason. She already hates Rouge, and it's just going to add more fuel to that fire. And it disconnects the team even more. It's like, right, this hodgepodge situation, they come together and they break apart because it is such a fragile ecosystem that, their issues always kind of butt heads with each other's issues to some extent, so that's where things kind of stand on that front. But currently it's like, hey, we saved the world, which obviously for Rita, it's like, right, they did it without her. That probably cuts even deeper because of that. So, but along with all that, we kind of see the early stages of the butt situation, their creation, them being tested out. Because obviously when we got introduced to them, they were already well into effect. So apparently this project predates 2016. That's like the earliest we saw of the project, but it was already like a thing at that point in time. So Dr. Yu got brought into it, who is played by Rico, or it might be like Rico. I'll go with Rico. Was it Agina? Which I knew best from Prodigal Son, where she played Idrissa, which I'm like, I loved her as Idrissa. Idrissa is like the most adorable human being ever. That's why she was easily one of my favorite characters on the show. And it's so interesting because she kind of brings kind of a similar energy. She's not as like crazy like Idrissa, but Dr. Yu has that kind of like, yeah, like she's even like dancing because like she's working on like, because it's something it's a degree or whatever she didn't get when she was in college, and now she's trying to make up for it, so she's kind of like practicing this dances and stuff like that. But she gets brought in on the butt project and she's all about it. She's super excited, and obviously the military are going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to weaponize it, which is like, right, that's kind of what they do. The Bureau of Normalcy in particular has done that time and time and time and time again. That's kind of been their shtick for a long time, as we know, a la Madame Rouge and stuff like that. So, interesting enough, and once again, this is always that degree situation. It's nothing like larger than like, oh, it's just interesting when you connect dots together. Well, her being in a DC show now, it's interesting because, like, well, first and foremost, I didn't know this because I knew her from Prodigal Son. There was something else I forgot. I looked up her filmography when Prodigal Son was airing, and there was some stuff on it I recognized. But regardless, I did not know she was on Gilmore Girls. I only know that because that's one of those shows my oldest niece is now obsessed with, and it's just one of those shows I just see her watching all because I've never seen Gilmore Girls, which I also didn't know Melissa McCarthy was in that show too. I was like, oh, that's wild. Oh, who's also in that? Sean Gunn, which I'm like, oh yeah, they recently mentioned that on oh god, this past season of Harley Quinn. Man, that's so interesting too, because it's like, man, there's so many levels to all that. Because what I was going to connect is like, oh, she was in a show with Sean Gunn, who is in the DC universe because he played Calendar Man and Weasel in The Suicide Squad. And James Gunn, his brother, is now the head of like DC stuff, which also correlates because like that was, like I said, that was a bit in Harley Quinn, and you know that was obviously done well in advance to everything happening. So it's just interesting. Like, once again, it's not like anything larger than like, oh, it's just funny when you connect dots and stuff together. Either way, she's the one that took over the project, and when everything went down, when the ant farm all the butts got released a couple years ago in 2019. Now it's like a situation of she's like, oh, she ended up saving one of the butts, Nicholas, and he's living with her. So it's like, right. So they've dealt with Darren Jones. They've dealt with what they believe to be the last butt, the one that seemed to be infected with the virus. But now this other butt's still alive. And I'm assuming because Nicholas is the one with the scars and stuff. And isn't Theodore Nicholas's? Aren't they the conjoined twin butts? That one she named Theodore / Teddy. So is Teddy the frozen one? So is Nicholas going to end up rescuing? Or it doesn't seem like Nicholas is infected. So it might be Cliff doesn't end up killing the other butt. Nicholas and you end up finding him and end up rescuing him. And that's kind of how things pop off. I have no idea. It seems at the very least that might be the situation. So she wasn't able to save everyone, but she was able to save Nicholas, and now it's like, right, and as we see with the Butt Hunter, I think he said like some of them were captured, well, some of them were dealt with because of him and other people, which I'm wondering, like, I guess maybe the other people are Bureau of Normalcy people, but I'm like, oh, I wonder have any of the superheroes in this universe had to deal with the butt situation or not. Oh yeah, one last thing I want to add to before the end is also bringing up the Shapoopy song. I actually never realized that it was actually a song. My association with that song is the Family Guy thing. So I thought like, oh, is that a song they made specifically for Family Guy? It's like, no, I just always assumed it was a Family Guy song. I never realized it's an actual song that they were like. Once again, there's a lot of stuff from Family Guy and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that's a reference or what that's in reference to and stuff like that. But I'm like, in the moment, because obviously I sung along too with Shapoopy. I was like, holy crap. Did not realize that was an actual song. So that was just a cover in the show. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. just regardless, I mean, I do appreciate the musical number in there. And I also appreciate it being that song, because if they hadn't done that, it would have never crossed my mind to actually look and see if that's actually a song. So now that I've seen it in Doom Patrol, I'm like, oh, now I know it's an actual song. I probably would have gone the rest of my life never knowing it, because I never would have bothered looking it up. I would have just been like, oh yeah, it's a Family Guy song. Whatever, you know? Either way, lot of very, very interesting things. It's going to definitely be interesting to see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.